All right. Boker Tov, you can hear me good. This is working really well today, right?
What?
All right. The mic. Usually I can't use this kind of a mic, but I feel like it's good. All right. So let's Vishamru, yeah?
Yes.
Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam B'nei uvein b'nei Yisrael Oti le'olam Oti le'olam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim et haaretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et hashabat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam Biom hashmi Shabbat v'yinafash Shabbat v'yinafash Shabbat v'yinafash V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam Savri Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen L'chaim. And our blessing. It is like very tart, right? Our blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, well, it is a pleasure to be studying with you this morning. Good morning.
And to you.
Thank you. So I am sure that you have already looked at your handout and are wondering, why is this starting with Gina? So we are reading 2 sections of Torah today. Our triennial cycle has us reading just 1 section from Achrei Mot and 1 section from Kiddushin, and both of those sections have to do with sexual ethics, which is why I didn't invite your daughter to join us today. She really wanted to come to Torah study. I was like, So they talk about the who, the what, the when, and the where of like who we're allowed to have sexual relations with. And the list is very disturbing in that we don't tell people not to do something that people aren't doing, right? But there is a glaring omission in this list of forbidden sexual acts. It talks very much in Vayikra throughout the entire book of Leviticus about the idea of pollution and impurity. And when it comes to sex, they talk about people becoming impure or kind of this polluted idea that people are marked by their sexual act. But the thing that is missing is the idea of consent. And in this moment, consent is in the headlines, right? Consent is an issue that we are constantly talking about. Consent is something I know I worry a lot about being a boy mom. My boys are way too young, but I'm already worried about it. Did you know that people can now actually download apps to give consent so that there is record of consent? Right? It feels both completely horrifying and yet somewhat necessary. So, what I wanted to go into today is to talk about consent as a critical aspect of sexual ethics. We are going to look at one line from Acharemot and one line from Kiddushin. But I wanted to also look back on two stories where the question of sexual ethics comes into play. And so then we can begin to think about, how does the Torah's language of sexual pollution intersect with our understanding of consent, coercion, and stigma? And how can the Torah, of course, point us toward a sexual ethics that cultivates dignity and self-agency? And so I wanted to start with the story of Dinah, a very famous story. I put the whole story here. I don't know that we need to read should we read the whole story, or you want to just... I don't know. Okay, do we know the story? I'm going to tell you the story of Dinah. Okay. I'll give you something. You want to read it? Yeah? Okay. Norman. Here.
Right?
Yeah.
I know how to use the switch.
You know how to use the switch? Apparently, I was rusty. Okay.
Now Dinah, the daughter whom Leah had born to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Shem, son of Hamor the Hivite, chief of the country, saw her and took her and lay with her and disgraced her. Being strongly drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and in love with the maiden, he spoke to the maiden tenderly. So Shem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as a wife." Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but since his sons were in the field with his cattle, Jacob kept silent until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor came out to Jacob to speak to him. Meanwhile, Jacob's son, having heard the news, came in from the field. The men were distressed and very angry because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing not to be done. And Hamor spoke with him, saying, "My son Shem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. You will dwell among us, and the land will be open before you. Settle, move about, and acquire holdings in it." Then Shem said to her father and brothers, "Do me this favor, and I will pay whatever you tell me. Ask of me a bride price ever so high, as well as gifts, and I will pay what you tell me. Only give me the maiden for a wife." Jacob's sons answered Shem and his father Hamor, speaking with guile because he had defiled their sister Dinah, and said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for that is a disgrace among us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become like us in that every male among you is circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell among you and become as one kindred. But if you will not listen to us and become circumcised, we will take our daughter and go." Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shem, and the youth lost no time in doing the thing, for he wanted Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most respected in his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shem went to the public place of their own and spoke to their town council, saying, "These people are our friends. Let them settle in the land and move about in it. For the land is large enough for them. We will take their daughters to ourselves as wives and give our daughters to them. But only on this condition will their representatives agree with us to dwell among us and be as one kindred, that all our males become circumcised as they are circumcised. Their cattle and substance and all their beasts will be ours, if we only agree to their terms, so that they will settle among us." All his fellow townsmen heeded Hamor and his son Shem, and all males, all his fellow townsmen, were circumcised. On the third day, when they were in pain, Simeon and Levi, two of Jacob's sons, brothers of Dinah, each took a sword, came upon the city unmolested and slew all of Shechem's house and went away. The other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the town, because their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and asses and all that was inside the town and outside, all their wealth, all their children, their wives, all that was in the houses, they took as captives and booty. Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My fighters are few in number, so that if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed." But they answered, "Should our sister be treated like a whore?"
All right.
Great miniseries.
It is. If you want to read The Red Tent, there is a miniseries also based on The Red Tent, Anita Diamant's take on the story. But here we have the story of Dinah. And there is a question here of consent. The story starts quick. It says, Dinah went out, right? Shechem saw her, took her, lay with her, and humbled her, right? So the ya'aneh, right? And then it zooms in on Shechem's emotional experience, right? His soul clung to Dinah. He loved her. He spoke to her heart. So we get this very descriptive, for Torah, that's like very descriptive and quite verbose actually about Shechem's feelings, which makes it even more glaring that we have no idea how Dinah is feeling. So when we're talking about the idea of consent, there's a question mark, right? So I gave you a few of our commentators. Rashi says, when it says, and he laid with her, vayashav ota, that means that he had vaginal intercourse with her. And then the afflicted her means that he had anal intercourse with her. So Rashi seems to not be talking at all about consent, just giving details about what happened between the two of them. But when we move to Ibn Ezra, he says Shechem had normal intercourse with her, but Scripture uses this term, ve'ye'aneha, and humbled her because she was a virgin. Right? So why would it be humbling for a virgin? Like why? Like what's happening here? Like there seems to already be like a demotion, right, in stature for Dinah if she was a virgin and now she's not. Yeah.
The bride price has just gone down tremendously.
Right. So her bride price. Right. We know, even I always love when my couples bring me a ketubah that they saw and they thought was beautiful, and they bring it to me to fill out, and they have no idea that they have. Yeah, they've selected a traditional ketubah text, and I have to write in there if she is a virgin and what her bride price is worth. Right? I'm like, I don't know that you really wanted this text, but okay, it's beautiful. Put it on your wall. Okay. So there is, like in the ancient world, right, and we get this through Talmudic texts as well, right, that the ketubah price for a virgin is actually twice as much as for a non-virgin. But I want us to just see like the mental space of our different commentators. Yeah. Bobby.
I think a lot of it is shaded by the fact that women in those days were property. like cattle and other possessions. And Jacob sees that without his consent, the property that he owned, his daughter, was defiled. And it's like someone breaking into your house and stealing your possessions.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because Jacob waits. He doesn't do anything. And then it's Dinah's full brothers, right? She has lots of brothers. She's got it, right? But it's her full brothers who go and slaughter the men. And they're the ones who say at the end, right? Should our sister be treated like a whore? And there's a little bit of a generational thing going on there too, I think. Yeah. Huh? But not Judah. Very good point. Who becomes the leader? Whew. It is such a deep story with so much mixed emotion and so many different layers. So I want to go to the Ramban, because he summarizes Rashi and Ibn Ezra and then rejects them. Gotta love him. Nachmanides. Will you read? Yeah.
And he lay with her, and he afflicted her. He lay with her in natural gratification, and he afflicted her unnaturally. This is Rashi's language. But Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra said, and he afflicted her naturally because she was a maiden. But there is no need for this, for all forced sexual connection is called affliction. Likewise, thou shalt not deal with her as a slave, because thou hast afflicted her. And so also, and my concubine they afflicted, and she is dead. Scripture thus tells, in Dinah's praise, that she was forced, and she did not consent to the prince of the country.
All right, so here, Nachmanides is saying, look at these parallel verses where we talk about this word that's in question, affliction, and they both deal with rape. Like a woman, or at least a woman who is not giving consent. And so he's saying Dinah was raped. She was forced. There was no consent in this situation. And then I gave you a more modern commentary, the Or HaChaim here. He says, why does it need to say Shechem is the prince in the land, etc.? Shechem's position in the community was the reason no one came to Dinah's assistance when she cried for help against being raped. Yeah. Use your mic. Yeah.
Something just occurred to me. And the question, when you talk about consent, the problems here is that the men did not consent to this woman being taken. There's no question here about her consent. The problem is the brothers, the father, did not consent. And when they went to make an arrangement so that the prince could marry her, they asked the father's consent. And it was the brothers who were not happy with it. The issue of the female consent is not in here at all. The consent would be given by the father to give his daughter to this other man. Makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It's red, but it's
Could this have all been a subterfuge for them to get, they took all the economic goods. They perhaps used it as an excuse.
okay. Yes. That's part of the disturbing part, right? Like on the one hand, you're like happy that her brothers are avenging her, but the way that they avenge her is, right? It is that every male is put to the sword, that they exactly overkill in both senses, right? And they take all of the goods, all of, right? It's really, it's an interesting way of looking at it as like an excuse for them.
Killing them all makes it permanent.
It makes it permanent?
Yeah.
Right, that no one can come and get vengeance again. So, okay, so it's interesting. I want to, so here, while maybe the text itself as you rightly point out, maybe the text itself doesn't highlight the need for the woman's consent, right? Because although, let's go back to Rebecca, right? When Abraham sends Eliezer to negotiate for a Canaanite woman, Rebecca's father, right, and brother, make sure she's good with it, right? And that's actually where we get that a woman can't get married if she doesn't actually want to marry the guy. So there is some consent in there, but you're right, that the text seems to be more concerned with the emotional impact on the men in the story than Dinah. And that's the point of it, right? That it's so absent and it is so vacant and we don't know how she feels. The Ramban, the Ramban seems to be saying, well, it is saying that she was forced. There's another commentary, there's later another Rashi commentary. Rashi notices they call her Dinah bat Leah. And he says, why the daughter of Leah? So scriptures call her, why not the daughter of Jacob? Why is it pointing out she's the daughter of Leah? Because just as Leah went out, she went out, so she's called Leah's daughter, since she was fond of going out. As it is said, and Leah went out to meet him, with an allusion to her, they formulated the proverb, like mother, like daughter. Okay, what is he talking about? You guys know well that Leah was the less favored of Jacob's wives, right? And Rachel was having trouble getting pregnant, and so she bribed Leah bribed Rachel by giving Rachel mandrakes, which are supposed to make you very fertile, but said, I get to sleep with Jacob tonight, right? And so Leah went out to greet him, all right? So they're associating Leah went out and Dinah went out. Mind you, it says Dinah went out to be with, like, the women, right? Not to entice somebody. So Rashi's doing like a blame the victim.
So he said versus she said.
I don't know that it's a he said versus, well, it's an Achmanides said versus Rashi said.
Well, I mean, they keep raising issues of why didn't she scream?
Okay, so.
Yes, why didn't she scream?
Right, so the Or HaChaim actually says that she did scream, but because of his position, nobody did anything, which again brings us back to a lot of headlines, right? We hear again, right? That again and again, people knew that, I mean, it just happens to all be men. It's not that women don't also take advantage of people sexually, but in the headlines, it's men. That these powerful men, people knew these powerful men were exploiting their position, taking advantage of people, entrapping women, blackmailing women, coercing women, forcing women. And they didn't do anything, right? Because of their position in the community. Okay, so here we have one example. Oh, yeah, sorry. Did you want to?
No, I was going to say, she had,
Like my jogging.
thank you. In those days, she had so much to lose as a human being, as a person. That's all she had as a human being a woman. That even if she was tempted,
Right.
you know, I can't see her giving in or trying not to, you know, get away. No matter how much she's tempted, she had so much to lose. At the same time, the culture at the time for her to scream, and he's a prince, you know, she had a situation, and I can imagine her brother, they look at it from a man's perspective. No matter how tempted you are, when you respect a woman, you respect a woman. Or even respect who she is and where she's from. There's something else that even it's in my character to do certain things, there's a point that lets you stop and think. And there was no respect at all.
And I can imagine that hit the core of their heart to madness, and that's possible. And especially they know what it meant in those days for that to have happened to her sister. You took her from her throne completely, culturally, and everything. So I can't say, and I think Jacob did the right thing. He didn't just react. He thought about it. He waited for his sons to come home. And we all know how difficult sometimes it is for her children to agree with us on strong points.
Yeah. Right, and one of the interesting things is that Jacob doesn't know necessarily that his sons are speaking with guile, right? So here, a woman losing her virginity in the ancient world, she's lost a lot of status, right? People know about it. But his marrying her, right, being married to a prince, them agreeing to circumcise and all of these things, maybe that would have been appealing to Jacob.
It's interesting that the sons agree to the marriage on the condition that all the males of the enemy be circumcised, the entire town.
With guile, they didn't agree to that.
What?
It was done with guile.
Right, that they knew they were tricking them. Yeah.
So A, was that to cause additional pain, or was it to get, because they're angry at what they did? Or B, they wanted to put them off guard, that once they do this, they will be, quote, safe from retribution. It's interesting that they should demand that first before ultimately killing them.
Well, I think the story of Dinah, like any biblical story, is very complex. And I think there's two rapes, and there's two issues of consent. I think there's the rape of Dinah who did not give her consent to Shechem, but I also think there's the rape of the Hittites, who consented to circumcision and then were thereupon killed. And I think in the broader sense, the whole of the Hittites were raped. So I think there's two issues here, and I think there's a play on consent in this story.
Beautiful. Okay. All right. So we have a sticky situation that even today, right? The problem is that we don't have Dinah's voice. And we don't know her side of the story. We know very much how her brothers feel, but we don't know how she felt. What is interesting is what is the concern of her brothers, right? The brothers seem to just be concerned that she has lost her virginity, right? That she is now polluted, that she has lost her status as this princess, right? That her ketubah is worth less. And they seem less concerned with if this was against her will or not.
Picking up on the idea that the Hittites were raped, just because the prince did something, the rest of the people have to pay the price. I think it was really guile that they said, all right, we can't give her to an uncircumcised man. You all get circumcised and that will be okay. That was just a bit of sugar to get the fish to bite. Mm-hmm. They knew what they had in mind, and they had in mind to just decimate the Hittite males. So I'm ambivalent on that.
Yeah, there was the question that you asked about why did they have them circumcised? I do think it was both of the things that you said. I think, one, they're going to be weak. They're not going to be in fighting shape, right? Two, rationally, I don't know, there is something about the punishment for rape having to do than like having a circumcision, right? That there's like some sort of like removal of impurity there. It seems to make sense. But yeah, so I want to keep going because I want to give you many more examples. So I gave you this text from the Dead Sea Scrolls, Apocryphon. Wait, I think I'm out of order. Hold on. Oh, okay. Sorry, I am out of order. Okay, so the Rivka Luvitz. All right, so this is from Dear Shuni, which I have upstairs in my office, if any of you want to come and check it out. It says, he lay with her and humbled her. It does not say Dinah screamed. Would you ever have thought that Dinah wouldn't scream? Rather, she was like a mute. Because of the pain and shame, she became silent and still. So there's the question. People think that if a woman didn't want something, then why wasn't she screaming? Why wasn't she kicking? Why wasn't she clawing? Why isn't there evidence of a fight? And sometimes there is, right? But sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's terrifying, it's shocking, it's paralyzing. Who are we to decide how somebody else should react? They're the victim. And then her silence, right? That's the one thing we get from the text, is Dinah's silence. We don't know how she felt during the act. We don't know how she felt after the act. We don't know how she felt about her brother's actions, although the rabbis have her marrying her brother Simeon. Very disturbing. But here we need, one of the reasons this is important for us is that we still have a stigma of silence. And women still don't talk about victim, or men. You know, they say like that many men have also been victims of unwanted sexual aggression and sexual acts, but we don't talk about it, right? And we don't talk about it for lots of layers, right? But a big reason we don't talk about it is because I don't want whoever is looking at me, talking to me, to think about me as a victim or to bring that up. I don't want to relive it, right? All of those things. I don't want the stigma. And that's what I want to, because our text, our core text today, they talk about this kind of impurity, pollution, and I think we still have that stigma, even though we think we're so much beyond what these texts teach.
She must have said something to somebody because her father knew. And it's obvious that he didn't tell her father.
Right. Well, right. I don't know. So when Shechem's dad comes and talks to Jacob, I don't know. That's a good question. Again, like in the mini-series that you write based on this story, right? Maybe Shechem's dad tells Jacob so that, because Jacob doesn't want to marry his daughter off, and then he's like, they've already, I don't know. We don't know. We don't know how he knows.
Commentary on Dina's reaction, what you said is correct. We have no idea how people react. I mean, we've seen these detective stories, and the detective says, he's not reacting as he should, so he must be guilty because of his wife was killed.
Right.
How does anyone know how one is going to react under emotional stress and great loss or whatnot? And it doesn't make it right or wrong or in any way indicate guilt or commission or non-commission or non-agreement or anything. I mean, this is a shocking event, and who knows how anyone might react in any shocking event. There is no formula.
Exactly. Yeah, I was listening to a podcast where they think, right, when you see pictures and it's like, somebody's smiling, right? And you're like, and you're supposed to describe them. They're happy. Somebody's frowning. They're like, they're sad. Right? Most of us, when we're sad, don't frown. Right? It's so, So they actually did this whole thing where they actually, instead of the stereotypical faces that we have for all of these emotions, actually just took pictures of people who actually were feeling emotions, and people only got it right like 30% of the time. Right? So we think we know, we think this is what it's supposed to look like, but in reality, that's not always how it works. Sometimes, but not always. There's no way for us to really predict. And so I gave you this contemporary text by Dr. Gila Benjamin. That's even harder to say than like any of these rabbis in the Talmud. All right. On the bottom of page 3, do you want to read? Do you want to read?
Oh, sure.
There you go.
Because it's Julia Ben Shimol. Victims are doing it for themselves, examining the move from victim to advocate. She writes, becoming able to speak about one's shame and deconstruct it is a key process of shame resilience, and why it is important to critically interrogate who can speak and who can be heard.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so here, it's important for us, for victims, to find their voices, and for us to empower victims to speak, right? And to not, as much as I love Rashi, right? Not Rashi them, right? Don't blame the victim. Don't say, well, you went out. Like mother, like daughter. Don't blame the victim. All right. So now I want to look at a man who is trying to be coerced into a sexual act. We have the famous story of Joseph. All right. Okay. So, you want to read?
Is this on?
Yes.
Genesis 39. After a time, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused. He said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master gives no thought to anything in his house, and all that he owns he has placed in my hands. He wields no more authority in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except yourself, since you are his wife. How then could I do this most wicked thing and sin before God?" And much as she coaxed Joseph day after day, he did not yield to her request to lie beside her, to be with her. One such day he came into the house to do his work. None of the household being there inside, she caught hold of him by his garment and said, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and got away and fled outside. When she saw that he had left it in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to her servants and said to them, "Look, he had to bring us a Hebrew to dally with us. This one came to lie with me, but I screamed loud. And when he heard me screaming at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and got away and fled outside." She kept his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought into our house came to me to dally with me. But when I screamed at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and fled outside." When his master heard this story that his wife told him, namely, "Thus and so your slave did to me," he was furious. So Joseph's master had him put in prison where the king's prisoners were confined.
Okay. All right, so brief reminiscence of Potiphar's wife, right? Come lie with me. Right, so here we have a lot of complications, right? We have the question of consent, right? A woman trying, here it's the opposite, a woman trying to force a man to be intimate. Joseph not consenting. Joseph giving excuse after excuse, which, by the way, we're learning, right, that you shouldn't give excuses. You should just say no. And this repeated, right, like day after day. She's trying to like wear him down. So there comes a question here in terms of like if she could have coerced him into it eventually. Does that still count as him giving consent? But it doesn't happen. And then his refusal and the story she tells. And notice that she said she was screaming at the top of her lungs. So we talked before about that if a woman yells, then we know that she didn't want it. But that's clearly not true, because here, even she's saying she yelled, nobody heard her. Okay. So I just wanted to give this text to add to the conversation of consent. Show it does go in both ways, and we have biblical examples of the question of consent before we get to our Torah portion, which we have 2 verses on the top of page 5. Do you want to, let's have Ed read. Thanks.
It's on?
It's on, all right.
All right. Leviticus 18:24. Do not defile yourselves in any of those ways, for it is by such that the nations that I am casting out before you defile themselves. And 20:10. If a man commits adultery with a married woman, committing adultery with another man's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death.
Okay. So, okay. I know you're doing Daf Yomi too. In Daf Yomi, we're in Sota, okay, which is like a whole book about an adulteress, or at least like a questionable situation where a woman was alone in a room with a man that her husband has warned her not to be alone in a room with, but there are no witnesses as to what happened, right? So she is brought in front of the community and she has to do this horrible ritual. Yes, the Sota. So here, what's interesting,
Her husband's request.
Well, I'm too far into it, because it can also, if her husband was in jail and the rabbi said that the rabbis warned her, then she can do it based on rabbinic request. But no, it's wild. All right. And they do ask a question, what if the husband doesn't want her to drink? And if he's already warned her, then what? So men, don't warn your wives. That's my... All right. Okay, so what's interesting is, so in Leviticus, not just in this verse, but also when it says a man lies with a man the way that you lie with a woman, this is an abomination. Even Ezra there as well says, brings up the issue of consent. All right? He's the first to bring up the issue of consent. So here, even Ezra is saying in 2010, if she had been raped, we wouldn't call her an adulteress. That's good. That's important. He says the same about a man lying with a man, that if it was forced, then they're not stoned. Okay. So the reason I wanted, so again, consent is very much missing from the text itself. It is not there in the Torah, even though it's in this long list of like who and what you're not supposed to have sex with, right? And when sex is considered less than holy. So even Ezra stresses that a victim coerced into an illicit sex act bears no guilt. This is a powerful statement. But it makes us think about the distinction between sexual coercion and consent. But the fact that he explicitly had to say it reminds us and points out that the biblical interpretations that came before him didn't include this in their conversation of sexual ethics. So here, I gave you a summary so that we don't have to read the whole thing, but it's there. So the Genesis Apocryphon, just because it's a weird, I'm sure you may not be familiar with this book. It's Dead Sea Scrolls. They talk about Sarai being abducted into Pharaoh's palace, and Abraham praying she not become defiled so that she is forbidden to him. right? But we know that she would be being forced. So here we see an association between, even if she was raped, that maybe she would not be permitted to her husband, and so that's why I wanted to bring that text. And then we have in Mishnah Ketubot, 51b, sorry, I put them out of order. So go not to 6, but to 7. Annabella, do you want to read it? Yeah.
Shmuel's father said, "The wife of an Israelite who was raped is forbidden to her husband, as we are concerned that perhaps her ordeal started as rape and ended willingly, i.e., during the act she may have acquiesced, and a married woman who willingly had relations with another man is forbidden to her husband."
Okay, pause. Anybody else want to puke? No. Okay, Bobby.
I'm not clear. What I'm not clear about is what happens to the raped woman? Where does she fit into society? Where does she fit? They talk about her husband. How does she fit into society?
Ooh, that was loud. Okay, I want to come back to that. Okay, where does the raped woman? All right, I want to come back to it. I don't want to forget. All right, because this is really important. Where does she fit into society? Okay, so here Shmuel's father is saying that the wife of an Israelite who is raped. This is important because the wife of a Kohen is different. Kohens can only marry virgins. And so when I was living in Israel, my year in Israel of rabbinical school, we went to this little alternative, like indie filmmaking studio, and we watched a bunch of short films, and they talked to us about how these films were based on Talmudic texts. So one of the films was about a Kohen's wife who somebody knocked on the door to ask for tzedakah, and she opens the door, and the man comes in and rapes her. And so she, of course, is like horribly upset, destroyed, wants to go to the police, etc., etc. But if she goes to the police, she's forbidden to her husband. So they go to the rabbi, and the rabbi tells her that maybe she wasn't raped, and maybe nothing happened. Like, how incredibly horrific, right? Little 10-minute film to like point out a horrific hole in our laws. Here, so it's important it's an Israelite, because an Israelite has a different status. Everybody else is allowed to marry widows, non-virgins, right? I always love the Talmudic story, and I'm not remembering who it is, right? But of the man who goes to visit the prostitute, who's like worth 7 bags of gold, right? And she has all of these silver and gold beds, and she's more beautiful than anything in the world, and his tzitzit hit him in the face right before he's supposed to sleep with her, so he doesn't sleep with her. And then she goes, and well, she's like, "Why won't you sleep with me?" Right? And he says, "Oh, I'm Jewish," and she goes and studies with his rabbi and converts to Judaism, and his prize for being such a devout Jew is that he gets to marry the prostitute. Okay? So, like, clearly it's okay to marry someone who isn't a virgin, because this was his great reward. Huh? He wasn't, right, exactly. He wasn't a Kohen, he wasn't a priest. Okay, so Shmuel's father it has that same kind of a tone as the Genesis Apocryphon, which is that once a woman is raped, then she can't go back to her husband. Right? This is what Abraham's worried about. Abraham's not a Kohen either. Nobody is yet, right? But But the rest of the daf, the whole rest of Ketubot 51b, is a bunch of rabbis telling him he's wrong. Okay? So why am I including it? Because once the idea is there, it's in our heads. Right? And that's the whole thing. Like with the idea of reading in our Torah portion today that you're not allowed to do any of these sexual things. And when consent is missing in the conversation, then sometimes if somebody is forced to do one of those things, the taint remains in our heads. And that's the problem. Is that, because when you ask Bobby, where does this raped woman fit into society? She is completely innocent. Unless her husband is a Kohen, she goes back to her husband. She hasn't lost any status. But we live in a world that is way more advanced, way more feminist, way more accepting than this world. And we still have taint in our head. And that's really the problem. We want people to come and speak out, to share their stories, to warn each other, right? A lot of these predators get away with it because they're kept when people don't come forward. There is a lot happening across the Jewish world. Right? A couple of prominent rabbis, people came out telling stories of these rabbis being sexual predators. So the Reform movement said, we don't want to keep silent. We don't want people to not know. And so they hired a law firm to do a deep inquiry in 3 areas. Camps, at the rabbinical school, camps, like the Jewish camps, the rabbinical schools, and congregations. And what came out was that there were people who once people were asked to tell their stories and given safe, protective space, that there were people who were repeatedly being protected by the congregation, passed on to another congregation, told, why are you ruining this person's career? Everybody loves them. There were predators within our movement. I'm very proud of the Reform movement. People think it's very embarrassing that we're airing out our laundry in public. I think it is an amazing display of leadership, that every movement should do this and every religion should do this. If we want people to come forward, though, with their stories, then it's that taint. We need to get rid of that taint. Yes?
A point.
Yes.
In the story of Dinah, the idea was how to solve the issue that she was raped was to marry her.
Right.
It was not Shechem, a girl that was raped. If she would marry her rapist, she would be okay.
Right, and mind you, that's Torah.
And
that's in the Torah.
How do they feel about it?
Yeah.
Being the rest of your life with your rapist. I'm not sure that I like that.
I'm not sure either. Yeah. All right, so I want you to keep reading the Ketubot 51b, because while I want to punch Shmuel's father just a little bit.
As Rava said, with regard to any case that starts as rape and ends willingly, even if she ultimately says, leave him, and she further states that if he had not forcibly initiated intercourse with her, she would have hired him for intercourse, she's nevertheless permitted to her husband.
All right, then you want to give Rava a high five, right? So Rava's like the extreme opposite. You could see, it seems like Rava is really responding to Shmuel's father by purposefully going extreme, right? Because Shmuel's father's saying, oh, here, if she's raped, then she can't go back because who knows? Maybe she liked it at the end of the day. First of all, women cannot control how their bodies react. You just should know that. It's actually been proven physiologically. Women can be enjoying things and their body's not producing any lubricant or outward sign that they're enjoying it, and their bodies can actually seem like they're enjoying something when they are mentally very much not so.
How does the husband feel?
So here, Rav is saying, I don't care if she liked it at the end of the day, even if, I love this, right? Even if somebody came to pull him off of her and she says, leave him, it's still rape. Even if she said, look, if he hadn't forced me, I would have hired him to have sex with me, still rape. Right? So Rava is like, rape is rape is rape. She's permitted. Awesome. And then Rav Yehuda also talks about when you're taken by captives. All right. You want to finish it, Annabella?
Rav Yehuda said, those women stolen by kidnappers are permitted to their husbands, as even if they had intercourse with their captors, it is considered rape. The rabbi said to Rav Yehuda, but while they are captives, they bring their kidnappers bread. This indicates that they are not acting under duress. He replied, they do so due to fear.
Beautiful. All right.
Makes sense.
Makes sense. So we have a couple of things happening here. One, right, like captive women, it doesn't matter. I remember when I was a teenager, there was a case, a woman, it was a rape case. A woman accused a man of being raped. She asked him to put on a condom, and so the jury found him not guilty. You remember? Yeah. So, I mean, you could think of many situations that are like where if you're captive, right? If you're a captive, that maybe you're trying to get on their good side, right? Here, Rav Yehuda is really saying it doesn't matter. Once you are in that category, there is no consent. There's no such thing as consent. And, right, we have that now in law in certain situations, right? Right? So a minor in America can't give consent. They can't give consent. In American law, and some universities, right, not all, but in some universities, an undergraduate student cannot consent to a professor, right? There's a power dynamic, right? In many companies, right, you have to like go before the board if you want to be in a relationship with somebody because of the power dynamics. Yeah.
Also in medicine.
In medicine.
Particularly psychiatry.
Yes.
That proviso is there, that the woman, assuming, the woman is not in a position to give consent because of the power authoritative type situation.
Beautiful. So, right, psychologists cannot be in relationship. Right. You can't have sex with clients. Same with rabbis, by the way. Makes it very tricky for rabbis to date in rural communities because they have this double rule where they're supposed to be with Jews, but they're not supposed to be with congregants. So when you're in a rural community and the 10 Jews in the area are all your congregants, it gets complicated. Yeah.
Just an interesting note, when I was in law school,
Yeah.
years ago when I was in law school and I was studying criminal law, the issue of rape came up, and my professor happened to have been a DCA judge in Florida, an appellate judge in Florida, and we talked about rape. He referred us to a particular case that was reported in the system, and he said, if you want my opinion on this, take a look at it. And so I read the case, and basically, it was extremely disturbing to me because his attitude was that unless a woman who claimed to be a victim of rape presented herself literally dripping blood and semen, it was not a rape.
Wow.
I was stunned by this, and that was in the books in Florida some years ago. Now, I don't know what has happened since. I would think now with Me Too and everything else, things are different. But that was very much the law in the state of Florida. Very disturbing.
The thing that at least in the story of Dina, I find that there's silence in the text, not necessarily silence in her, because we just don't know what happened there. So it's almost as if the silence of the text seems to suggest that it doesn't matter. And it's terrible, but it's almost as if that's what seems to suggest. You know, because I guess that unless I'm missing part of the story, that we are assuming that she was silent. And I'm not sure that that's the case. It just doesn't say that.
Yeah. It is disappointing.
The category of the captive woman is discussed in the Talmud in Ketubah. And the rabbis assume that if a woman is captive, that she's been raped. And it's then up to the woman to prove that she has not been raped.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like what others have said here. So that was the difficulty of the decision in terms of the captive woman.
Yeah, so in the Talmud, the captive woman is assumed to have been raped, which, by the way, means that she didn't willingly, right, no matter what happened. But what's interesting is that the women will also, which is why I gave you this text, Mishnah Ketubot 2:9. Let's read it instead of me saying what it says. Bobby, you're reading?
Where am I reading?
Sorry, it's on page 6. I give you so many texts, holy moly. Okay.
In the case of a woman who was imprisoned by Gentiles due to a monetary offense committed by her husband, once she is released after he pays his debt, she is permitted to her husband, even if he is a priest. There is no concern that they violated her because their objective is to coerce the husband to pay his debt in exchange for her release. Were they to abuse her, it is possible that he would be unwilling to pay. However, if a woman was imprisoned due to a capital offense and sentenced to death, once she is released, she is forbidden to her husband, even if he is not a priest, due to the concern that perhaps her captors violated her, and she acquiesced to one of them. With regard to a city that was conquered by an army laying siege, all the women married to priests located in the city are unfit and forbidden to their husbands due to the concern that they were raped. And if they have witnesses, even if the witness is a slave, even if the witness is a maidservant, both of whom are generally disqualified as witnesses, they are deemed credible. And a person is not deemed credible to establish his status by his own testimony. Therefore, a woman is deemed credible to claim that she was not deemed credible to claim that she was not violated. Rabbi so-and-so said, I swear by this abode of the divine presence that my wife's hand did not move from my hand from the time that the Gentiles entered Jerusalem until they left. And I know for a fact that she was not defiled. The sages said to him, a person cannot testify about himself. The legal status of one's wife is like his own status in this regard. Therefore, your testimony is not accepted, and your wife is forbidden to you.
This guy must have been dreaming.
Right, we were holding hands the whole time. Too bad. Unacceptable. You can't defend yourself. All right, so to reiterate your point. Yes.
What's the societal interest in ripping apart that relationship? What's the benefit? What's the example that they're trying to set?
So
and is going to take this enterprise forward in the way that Hashem intends us to live our lives.
So you sound like a good Reformed Jew, Richard. Right, right, because that's our constant question. And actually like a really good filter. I was just talking recently about, I was teaching an Intro to Judaism class, and there's this has happened to me twice, where people were asking about people who quote Torah or scripture for their own benefit, and how do you know if you're doing the right thing or not? This seems pretty bad, right? What is the benefit of, like, can we not talk about, like, in your head, did you not get the sweetest picture of this couple? This rabbi holding his wife's hand the whole time, protecting her, right? The two of them cuddled up together while the town is in siege. Nothing happened. We were fine. I held her hand the whole time. Like, how precious and sweet, right? So why split them up? That's terrible. I actually told some of you, if you were at Shabbat last night, I told a story about a couple who was very much in love, but were supposed to get divorced because they hadn't had children after 10 years, right? And he was a good, law-abiding Jew. So the Danielle Hartman has this like filter in Putting God Second, where he says you have to take what Hillel taught, right? What is hateful to you, do not do to another person's. That's the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and learn it. And that has to be your filter through everything. So if we use that as our filter, we're not breaking up this couple, right? Yeah.
It says she's not permitted, well, it talks about how she is not permitted to her husband, but that suggests for sex only. He's still responsible for feeding her and housing her and clothing her and everything else. Mm-hmm. It's just supposedly there shouldn't be any sex. So, who knows what goes on in the household.
This is interesting. Okay, that's something I want to learn. Look. All right.
Your fraternal, your religion is determined, your Judaism is determined by whether or not your mother was Jewish.
Right. Okay. So that is a big concern, right? Is who's the father? In Sota especially, it's like seems kind of like the Sota ritual might be a paternity test, and there are waiting periods. So there is a waiting period. Like a woman is not supposed to marry within a certain amount, 3 months of her husband dying, because after 3 months you would know if you're pregnant. So I'm like, and all right, there is concern about who's the father in patrilineal, right? And we get our tribe from the father, but you get your status as a Jew from the mother. Anyways,
Well, that acknowledges that